Hi folks, I'm Allie with the Potomac Bead Company, and I'm going to talk to you about brick stitch today. Brick stitch is usually used at the end of bracelets because it's a naturally degressing stitch. So it's going to get smaller and smaller here. I've chosen to show you the end of an imperial bracelet because it shows you nicely with the cubes how it's gotten to be smaller and smaller. The first row starts out 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and then goes down to 1. I'm also going to be using cubes today to show you how to do that. And I'm using a size 10 English beading needle, and I'm using wildfire beading thread in 0.006. A 0.008 thread would work as well, so either one would work. When you're starting out brick stitch, just like when you're starting out a herringbone stitch, you need to start with a ladder stitch piece. So to do that, I have on my wildfire thread, I have an 11 OC bead that's just hanging out there as my stop bead. I'm going to make my initial ladder stitch 5 beads wide. And to do that, what I'm going to do is pick up 2 beads. I'll move these out of the way here. I'm going to pick up 2 beads and let them drop down next to my stop bead. To do the ladder, I want these beads to sit right next to one another. So I'm going to be sewing in a circular fashion. My needle originally is coming out of that first bead from the left side here. So I'm going to go in from the right. And what this is going to do is this is going to pull that second bead so that it's sitting right next to the first on the side. I'm going to sew up through the second bead. Again, my needle is going and my thread is going in a circle. We also have another video for ladder stitch, so if you're stuck on the beginning portion here of the ladder, you can check out our other video for that. Next, I'm going to add another bead. When I do my third bead, the third bead drops down next to the second. And you can kind of hold your bead in place if you get lost of which way your thread needs to go. The bead needs to sit right next to that one, so I know that my thread and my needle are going to go in a circle. I'm going to pull nice and tight, sewing through the bead before, and then again sewing through the last bead that you put on. And that's putting on my third bead. I'm going to continue this for my fourth and fifth bead as well. Sewing on a bead, sewing down in a circle, and then back up through my last bead here. And I'm going to do it one more time to show you how to get this all started. And that's going to sit those seed beads right nice next to one another. So now I have my little section here where I have my stop bead on and I have my ladder stitch that is 5 cubes wide. Again, I'm using cubes because it's really easy to see. So we're going to be doing a degressing ladder stitch to get that end stitch. I'll also go over how to get it that it stays 5 beads the whole way. But right now, every time you start with brick stitch, you are going to start each row with 2 beads. So 2 beads go in my middle, or onto my needle, and I'm going to pick up my second thread bridge right here. So this would be my first thread bridge through bead number 5 and number 4. Because I'm putting on 2 seed beads, I'm going to skip the first one and go to the second one. Going underneath that thread bridge, and that should have 2 threads there. And I'm going to go back up through that second bead that I put on. I'm taking my needle under the thread bridge and then I'm going back up through that second bead. And what that's going to do is when I pull tight here, it's going to make that bead sit up straight. Now after this, after I add my 2 initial, I'm going to add 1 at a time. I add a bead, I sew underneath that next thread bridge in line, and then I'm going to sew back up through the last bead that I put on. And I'm going to do that one more time. Bead goes on, sew under the thread bridge, pull tight, get that tail out of there, and then I'm sewing back up through that same bead again. I'm going to pull tight, and then we're going to start our next row. So that row had 4. The next row that we do is going to have 3 beads. Again, my row of brick that I'm going to do starts out with 2 beads at a time. Skipping the first thread bridge and going to the second, since I have 2 beads on my needle. and going back up through that second bead. So you can see the first bead that I put on always sits a little bit off-sided. If you do only put on one bead, you're going to see thread on the side of the bead. So that's why you put on 2 beads at once. Another bead goes on, grab onto that last thread bridge, and back up through the bead. That gets my 3 rows. We'll degress to 2. So for when I'm down to 2, I only have 2 beads going on. I pick up the second thread, and then sew back up through the second bead. For my final bead, what I can do is add my bead. If you look on the beads here, generally speaking, what we do is we add a bead. If you sew through the thread bridge at this point, you're going to see why you don't usually start with 1 bead, because you're going to see that thread on the side of your bead, and then you can sew back up through. And that's going to finish it off. Generally speaking, I end my brick stitch here with 2 beads, so that way I don't see any thread hanging out on the side of the brick. For brick stitch, this is how you're going to get it so that it's naturally degressing here, that you're going to get that little ladder step and you're going to get a triangular form. It's great for the ends of bracelets or necklaces, and it's a great way to finish off a look. You can finish this off of herringbone, you can finish it off of anything that has that ladder attached with it. In addition to doing a degressive here that you're getting smaller, what you can also do is make it so that it stays 5 rows wide, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. Okay, so I have my stop bead onto my thread, and I've just cut off that extra little piece that we just made. And what I'm going to show you is how to keep brick stitch from getting degressive, just to keeping it even. What's actually going to happen is a little bit of a zigzag that's going to go on when we put our beads on. So I have a stop bead on my wildfire, and I'm going to, again, start with my ladder stitch. So this is a good refresher for you. I'm just going to do it 4 beads wide. I put 2 beads onto my needle, and I'm going to sew back through that first bead in a circular motion, and then my needle is going to go back through the second. And like I said, I'm just going to do this one 4 wide and get this ladder stitch to start off my brick. And the reason we're starting with the ladder always for brick is because brick stitch relies on those threads that are showing here, those little bridge threads. So you need to have those present in order to start your brick stitch. So I have 4 beads. And actually we'll do 5 just to make it a little bit wider. I have my 5 beads on that I've just ladder stitched onto the beginning. And I'm going to get ready to start doing my brick stitch where it's not going to get smaller and smaller. So usually we put on 2 beads, we skip the first thread, and we go to the second thread. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick up the first thread. What's going to happen then is that second bead, as I go back, or the first bead, as I go back through the second bead, is just going to kind of hang out on the side. And that's going to get that a little bit uneven. You can see that little unevenness there that's going on. Again, I'm going to continue with my brick stitch that you've been doing the whole time, picking up a bead, grabbing the understitch there, that little bridge of thread, sewing back up through the cube, and back through. Again, keep on adding and keep on making your brick stitch longer. And you can do a whole bracelet like this too, in this form, if you don't want it to get naturally smaller. This will give you kind of a peyote look though. So peyote is a much faster stitch. So now I've put 5 beads on. That first bead, again, because I put on 2, is just kind of hanging out on the side. Again, what I'm going to do is put on 2 beads because I'm getting ready to start my next row. And instead of skipping a bridge, I'm going to that first bridge. Going back up through that, back up through that second bead there. And that first bead's just going to kind of hang off to the side. And this is how you're going to get a consistent amount of beads in each brick row. Is that you're going to add 2 beads at the start and then just go through that first little thread bridge. That way you're not going to be downgrading beads you're always going to have the original start amount. So I'm always going to have 5 beads in every row by doing it in this method. Once you're done, and what you can see that's happening is it's getting that zigzag effect where half a bead is going to be off on either side. I'm going to do one more row to show you. I start with 2 beads, and instead of grabbing onto the second stitch that would make it only have 4 on this section, I'm going to grab onto that first thread bridge. Going up through the second bead. Nice tight pull, and it's going to lay down right next to it. And then I just finish off with the next 3 beads, sewing one on, going through the thread bridge, and then back up through the bead. If you ever have the occurrence where the bead just falls off, that means that you didn't actually grab on to the bridge, the little thread underneath there. That's why it would just fall off the end of your thread. And you can do a lot of these seed beading stitches. I use wildfire beading thread for. You can use Fireline, you can use Nymo thread. The reason I like the wildfire is because it is a non-stretch thread, and it's conditioned so that way it does not stretch, whereas you're going to find with Nymo that it really stretches. Fishing line, if you're using a thin fishing line, even if it's thin, sometimes you have problems going back through the beads, and also it will eventually dry rot. One of the reasons that I like using wildfire thread also is because it's a made in the US product, so there's not a lot of stuff in the beading world that we can say that's made in the US, and this is just one little thing that you can say, yep, it's made right outside of Philadelphia in the US, and quality-wise I think it's just as nice as the Fireline, and it's much cheaper than Fireline, so that's why I choose to use the wildfire thread as well. So I continue with this, and those are my 2 ways that I can work with brick stitch, either making it go in a triangle or making it go side by side to get that same look. Again, peyote is going to give you pretty much the same look here with the cubes, so peyote is going to be a much faster stitch than doing brick stitch. But need be, if you ever have a pattern that calls for brick, now you know how to do it and to make it be the same size and the same length of beads for each row, or how to make it degress so that way you can end some of your bracelets with it, herringbone or imperial bracelets or different designs. So hopefully you learned a little bit. If you have trouble doing the brick stitch, or if you have trouble doing ladder stitch, or you just need to familiarize yourself with some other stitches, check out our YouTube channel, some of the other videos, and they'll help to get you learning different sizes of beads, different information. Also check out our Facebook page, and hopefully you get a chance to visit one of our stores and attend one of our classes. So thanks a lot for watching.